cannot find my favorite scraper, the one that I've been using for years that's really wore down. This one's nearly new, and it's not nearly sharpened the way I like to sharpen them. But I think my wife has my good one. She's been doing furniture, and I'm pretty sure that's where it's at. As we're speaking, I just killed a brown recluse spider crawling up my leg. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not. There he is right there, and I promise you for sure that is a brown recluse. If we turn him over, you can certainly tell. Some people would be afraid of that. I've been bitten 3 times. I'm dang near immune now. The first time was a pretty bad reaction, the second time just minimal, third time almost no reaction. So I'm not worried about them. Anyway, this is how you do it. You know, you can waste time with all kinds of other processes. This is the fast way, and it also smooths the wood at the same time. And this is the old school way. This is the way that most luthiers trained in the classical violin making would do. And if you're careful, you barely hardly remove any wood at all. It's almost all finished. But you can see it goes pretty fast. And it goes much faster if I had a little better, sharper scraper than this one. I'm going to probably have to stop off camera and sharpen this. But I think this is going to be much, much better. It's going to get rid of all of the broken, cracked seams and all of the discoloration where I was trying to match finish colors. And it's just going to make it all one color. So I think it's just going to look so much better. I think I'm probably just going to have to stop and sharpen this scraper a little better. I mean, I could get it done with this. It would be a much better tool, and then we'd have a second good scraper here in the shop. So I think that's what I'm going to do, is take time and sharpen this. I might even show a little bit of that process, because I know people are always interested in how you sharpen these. Now, the typical cabinet scrapers, which is what this is, they basically just square it off, and then they just burnish both sides, and then both sides are used to scrape with. But that's not a fine enough scraper for the work that we're doing here. It just, I mean, it works pretty good, but it doesn't work as good as the method that I'm going to show you. And this was taught to me by an old violin maker when I very first started. And I like his method better, and that's why I do it that way. So here we go. Okay, so I've got a little belt sander here, and it's got fine abrasive paper on it. I'm going to use it to work it around like this, is how I'm going to do it. And that'll put a nice long flat edge on this scraper. So here we go. Okay, 99% of that was done on this flat beveled side. I did turn it over, but basically almost laid it perfectly flat just to knock off the burr that was on the backside edge. That just saves me time over at the actual hone, which is where we're going next. And I called this a hone, but it's just an Arkansas whetstone, however you prefer to refer to it. It's just a whetstone. And I like to use oil on it. I know a lot of folks these days use water. I'm old school, and oil works for me, so I use oil. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to lay it down flat and make sure that the flat side of the blade is really flat. I don't want any raised burrs on that side, so it's just, you know, knocking down the whole flatness there of the back side of the blade. And I'm pretty sure that that's good. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that because of the grinding process that we did a minute ago. So it's already pretty sharp, but it's not sharp enough. So now I'm going to work on that flat beveled edge that we made I'm not going this way back and forth. I'm actually rotating that edge. That really works right on the edge that way. It really sharpens up that edge. Just rotating it into the edge. And you can try to stay at a consistent angle to some degree. The more consistent you can be, the better you'll like your results. It's not that easy to do. Always looks easier on video than it is, but it's not that hard to do either. And then, like, if you see a spot where you're not getting any oil up on your blade, well, then you need to work that spot and try to get a consistent amount of oil coming up all the way around. Kind of gives you a clue that you got the sharpness about the same. Now I'm switching to kind of just a circle pattern going around like this. Whatever works for you, there's no black and white magic here. It's just whatever works for you to get a good sharp, razor sharp edge. And I want it as razor sharp as I can get it, where it'll shave hair. You gotta be careful with this, and even cleaning it off, you gotta be careful you don't cut yourself. It's pretty good, but I don't think it's anywhere near good enough yet. I'm going to go to the flat side here a little bit, work it a little bit. I don't really want to make a bevel on the flat side much. A tiny, tiny, tiny amount would be all right. It would be just a very tiny bevel if I make any on the back side. That's just mostly doing that to kind of make sure that that back side is good and flat and brought up to this beveled edge. I really want to do 90%, 99% of the work on the beveled edge. So unlike, most things that you sharpen on both sides, for this purpose, you pretty much just sharpen the one side. At least that's the way I do it. And as I mentioned, it was the way Mr. Bearden taught me, and Bearden Violin in St. Louis was a very well-renowned violin maker years ago. I don't know if they even exist anymore, to be perfectly honest with you. I know one of them got in trouble with the law for, I think, stealing a very expensive violin, but it wasn't the fellow that taught me. I don't want to drag them through the mud, but I'm pretty sure something happened. It was $1 million violin, and the one guy went to jail, so that's all I do know. And I'm still not real happy with this. So for the most part, I'm just going to keep doing this. I'm not going to show it on camera. I'm going to get this thing as razor sharp as I can get it. And when I get there, I'll bring you back and show you the next step. I won't lie to you, that was a hard process. I went back to the sander and beveled it some more. I used all 3 grades on this stone from the rough to the medium to the fine, and kept going back and forth and working on certain spots where it just wasn't shaving, but pretty much it now shaves pretty much the whole curve now. And then after I got it pretty sharp on there, well then of course I honed it right here on my leather hone, if you will. It's just a piece of leather glued to wood, and I've been using it for years. It works great. You have to pull. If you cut toward the leather, you're going to cut the leather. Very easily cut the leather. It really does do a nice job. You got to do a lot of strokes to make any difference on the leather once you get to the leather. If you are a patient person, it will pay off in the long run because it will save you time, as the scraper will just peel the finish right off. Now, admittedly, this process, the blade edge doesn't last as long as doing it the traditional carpenter way, if you will, or the cabinet maker way, however you want to refer to it. This won't last as long because you've got a razor sharp edge. and you're going to curl this edge over, which is our next step, and I'll show you how you do that. And I got to be honest, this next step is the step that just sends chills up my spine because it is so dangerous in a lot of ways. Well, to make the video editing easier for Melissa and to save myself another camera setup and etc., I'm just going to try to do it right here on the desk. Now, I've never done it this way before, but I put it in this portable vise, this drill press vise, which is a pretty stout one, a pretty heavy one, a little heavier than average. And now you take this hardened piece of steel, which is a burnishing tool. This is the beveled side here, and you start on the beveled side and you curl it over the other way. And why does this send chills up my neck? Because if you slip, if you're up here like this and you slip and come down on that, it will just cut your finger off. Because you're putting quite a bit of pressure on this with the burnishing tool. You want to try to do it in an even as possible stroke and not stop. Because if you stop, you will make a dent there. Yeah, that's good. The edge is curved over now, and you'll never see that on camera because it's tiny. But there's a real curved edge that's curved over, and you can feel it with your finger. Okay, I don't think this is the perfect job that I've ever done. It's not the best job, I'm sure. But now I think you'll see this really peeling this finish off. So here we go. Oh my gosh, yeah, it's just so much better. It's just grabbing the finish and just jerking it off of there. It won't take long now.
What do I do with all my...
Yeah, it's cutting so much better. It's hard to explain. You still can't just take it off real easy because there's so many curves and so much detail that has to be done. So, you know, I'm working on it, but it's going to take some more work. I'll go ahead and do a little more on camera, but then I'm going to finish this up and I'll show you the detail work that I have to do to clean it up the rest of the way. Might as well just say on camera too, I don't normally refinish old violins or refinish any instruments, but sometimes you might as well. The way it looked was so bad, at least it'll look good now, and which to me will bring the value back up.
Sorrow with all the loss I've gained while I'm waiting for tomorrow.
Well, I'm going to have to get a smaller scraper now and get into more detailed spaces, and so I'll get started with that and I'll show you how I'm doing that. Well, I made myself a mini scraper out of, again, these little miniature cabinet scrapers, and I've sharpened it with the same process. Now, I'll admit this one I didn't spend as much time on. It's not quite as sharp as the big one, but it's working pretty well for the detail, and I really need to spend some more time, honestly, to make it a little sharper, but it's certainly better than nothing. And I'm able to get into the detail now right around the purfling here where there's a little deep spot, and get into that deep spot and clean it out. I'm really happy with the results of this so far. This is going to make the whole thing look a lot more uniform instead of so mismatched with all the repairs. Now that's assuming I can get the stain to go back on it fairly uniformly. And I think I can. I may go to my little X-Acto knife with the round blade too. Sometimes that works just fine for getting into this detail and scraping. You know, I do it quite often. You get in here like this and you can scrape detail with that. And in certain places it works better. Now it's just got a straight blade. It doesn't have a hook on it. If you do it right, it works great. And sometimes I'll sharpen this blade. The factory blade right out of the package is pretty darn sharp and it works fine for general scraping. But if you really want to hone it up a little bit more, you can, and it even works a little bit better. Gets smoother, you know. the factory grind isn't really that smooth. That's very sharp, very sharp. And it doesn't take long to sharpen these, and it really does a good job when you get down into this detail area. So that's probably the way I'm going to proceed. This seems to work the best, and it's got such a small curve that it fits down into these little spots really well. Okay, well, you see my process, and I'll go ahead and finish this off camera just to save a little footage, because we eat up so much footage on this project to begin with already. And I'll show you what it looks like at the next step. Well, that, my friends, is what she looks like after taking all the finish off. Now you can see some of the severe breakage, you know, and I had to replace this piece of wood because it was just gone. And in this area here where they punched a hole right through where the sound post was, and there's all kinds of other breakage. There's a straight line where it broke completely straight across there. I mean, seriously, you can't even begin to know how many breaks there are. There were tons of breaks, as you saw in all the little parts. This is broke several places through here. It cracked all the way down through here. I mean, there's just cracks everywhere. But they're much more hidden now that I've taken the finish off. I'm going to work on cleaning the finish up a little bit more, and then I'll show you the process for putting it back with some stain that's going to make it look beautiful, I think. So many people will tell me they know all these different things, and I think I'm just going to try to head off a comment or two where this is broke straight across there. Someone's going to say, oh, that was an earlier repair where they put in a piece of wood because it's so perfectly straight across. I can tell you for black and white certainty that is not a filled in piece of wood. What that is something sharp hit it right there and broke it right in half, and it crushed all this other wood in the area, and I've straightened all that out. And the reason you can tell that it's not an inserted piece of wood is if you look right here, there's a curl going through this piece of wood, and it continues down into this piece of wood, and all of the grain lines match up perfectly. So it is not an inserted piece of wood, even though that's what it looks like. I have to admit that's what it looks like. So there's all kinds of things on this violin like that people will say, oh, those are just earlier repairs. No, they're not. This is all crushed junk. I mean, this thing got crushed. It was in the worst shape of any top I've ever seen come in the shop. Like I said, I don't normally ever refinish them. I almost never do that. I mean, I've only refinished a couple of violins in my whole career because I just don't think that's a good thing to do. But this one might as well have done that because we were so far gone on this one that, you know, it's just time to do it. Now, the old timers would not touch these with sandpaper either. They would only use the scraper on it. Well, you know, Stradivari's day, that was the best thing you've got, was a scraper. And you can do a wonderful job with a scraper, especially if you're highly skilled. But I think the sandpaper does an even better job. And I think if Stradivari were alive today, as I said, he's a genius, and he takes advantage of his environment, I think he would be saying to these people that are the purists, what's wrong with you? Don't you know about 3M sandpaper? And I think he would be saying that. I seriously do. Because he used everything to his advantage. And I think he would use this to his advantage. Now, some people say, well, the reason he didn't do it was because it would fill the pores. No, the reason he didn't do it is because he didn't have it. That's the reason. The fill in the pore thing is such a myth anyway, because your finish going over this is going to fill the pores, period. Black and white, you know, get over it, it's going to fill the pores. In fact, I think sanding it stops it from filling the pores even better, because the sand will get into the end of the pore, clog it up, and then the finish can't penetrate deep into the wood. So I think this is actually superior to not sanding. So that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. The rest of those skeptics and those purists and those snobby people can just think what they want, because they are just a bunch of snobs, and they've been passing down myths for years, and it's time that somebody set them straight, because there are tons of myths out there, just tons of them. Resanding this like this will blend a lot of those cracks together a lot better. Where we had to put in these little tiny fills, I'm going to dig those back out and I'm going to fill them with sawdust. It wouldn't have worked to fill them with sawdust before because you'd have to sand it to get the sawdust. It wouldn't have worked with the finish on there. Not very well. Yes, you could have made a sawdust paste and put it in there, but it still just didn't work all that great. And the other thing about that is that the sawdust and glue thing always shrinks a lot. So this is going to cause me headaches, but I'm going to do it to try to hide it a little bit better. That's the reason I'm doing it, not because I think it's a great fill, but it will hide these repairs a little bit better. So I'm going to scratch the top layer of my fill out of there, just the top layer, not all of it, so that I don't have to fill a deep gouge, because if I had to fill a deep gouge, it would take forever with the sawdust and glue. Okay, so I've got that touched up there. I'm going to take just a tiny bit of glue, put it on here, press it into place, and then what I do is I actually start sanding in other areas like this, and then I bring the sanding dust up and it covers that glue area, and you rub it in and you really can't hardly see it. So there you go, it's filled with the sawdust there now. And this little spot right here now where the white is, I'm going to chip out those little, just the top surface of them and fill them with glue. This is where it just completely broke a hole through the top. And I found the pieces and pieced it back together. Again, I'm just scratching it lightly just to take the top of that off so that the glue will fill it without multiple applications. It's going to be a little trickier one because it's kind of a big circle. Getting the glue worked into all the cracks and crevices right there. And then I'm going to try to just dry it off and then sand it and push it up into the area again. The other thing about that method is it will ruin your sandpaper because you're getting glue on your sandpaper. But that's okay. We can work around that. And you want to make sure you get all the excess glue removed, otherwise your finish won't work there either. Now, if that was just a tiny hole, I would only put a little tiny bit of glue on there, but that was a big circle of repairs. I could have done one at a time, yes, but that takes too long and I don't have that kind of time. I've already got way more hours in this than I'm billing for. Way more. Stripping this whole top is not on the clock. I'm doing this on my own time. But that looks so much better. In fact, there's just another spot or two right down here. I'm going to do that same thing too. Just two little spots. Again, I just push it down in the hole real good. Wipe it off. And then just sand it full.
What do I do with all the pain I am aching like a river?
Well, I'm going to just do some more cleanup like that off camera. You cannot see any of those little white fill spots now, so hopefully see if I can't try to find a way to blend my little piece of wood there. But I think the way I'm going to finish this will take care of all of those issues anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to try to airbrush the oil varnish, which I've never tried before. I'm going to pre-stain the oil varnish, and I'll test it, of course, on something else first. But I have a feeling that way I can control the color and, you know, really make sure everything's nice and even. And we'll put it back very similar to the way it looked originally that way. At least that's my goal. I have high hopes that it will work, but I've never tried it, and we'll see. I've never heard of anyone airbrushing oil varnish. So it may be a thing, but if it is a thing, I've never heard of it. I've never looked for it. That's really looking good now. I'm just going to detail it a little bit more and then we'll show you the next process. I'll tell you one more good thing that just came from this, sanding this all down, is I found another hairline crack right in here that I hadn't noticed before, and it comes through underneath where I've got this clamp. So I've got this clamp leveling it out and this clamp drawing it together. I got glue down in there pretty good on both sides, and I think that'll be fine once that dries real well. So we're just detailing it, and I'll have to let this set for a little while now and we'll get back to it. Well, my friends, this could just be a total chase my tail episode right here, but I am going to try airbrushing this True Oil Varnish with some dark walnut Minwax stain mixed in. It did blend okay, it did mix. The question is, will this even spray through this airbrush? I don't know. It's not that thick. I think it'll probably pick it up. I've got a piece of scrap spruce here, which will be very similar to what we're going to be spraying it on, and I'm going to give it a try and see what it looks like. Well, my friends, I'm not even going to go outside on this because I don't think this is going to be very caustic or anything. This True Oil Varnish is pretty friendly. So I'm going to just spray it right over the trash can here as a test and see if it even picks it up and sprays it. And it might not. There it goes. Okay, it sort of works. I'll have to do a light application, otherwise it gets blotchy, it looks like. In the light areas here it's not too bad. Try a little lighter. Looks like I'm going to have to do very light applications like that, but that is working. I think the light application works great, the heavy application not so much. So I'm glad I practiced it. Maybe like do a light application, let it set maybe 10 minutes or something, and try another light application to get it built up. This stuff takes forever to build up. Mostly I'm looking for the color right now. If I can get the color on there, then I can let that dry and then just build it up with clear. So I think it's got potential. I'm going to put some more color in this because I don't think it's dark enough, and we'll go from there. There's no one in the shop and I'm wearing a respirator, as you might be able to see, and I'm just going to spray right over this trash can because it's too humid to do it anywhere else.
While outside it's big, I am longing like the water.
It's not perfect, but that's not a bad first coat. I'll let that sit 10 minutes or so, and I'll put another coat or two on there, and maybe even make this a little darker yet. This patch, where I had to patch in the wood, of course, had to turn a different color. It's just the way it always works. It just can't cooperate, no matter how you do it. The only good thing is that this is primarily underneath the fingerboard, and if I have to color it separately, that's okay. At least most of that will be under the fingerboard. You won't see it very much. This is a little whiter here too because of being a replacement piece, and this is a little whiter being a replacement piece. But otherwise, it's not too bad. You know, it just is what it is, and you can only do so much. And this is about the last magic trick I've got to offer. So here we go. Well, there's about 2 to 3 applications of the oil varnish by spraying it. First time I've ever tried that, and I tell you what, it may be the way I do it from now on. It's going on so nice. To be honest though, it's going on so thin that it's not very good, but on the other hand, it's very even color, so I might use this for the coloring process and then use just the old method of putting on the clear over the top of this. But that's really looking nice. I mean, you can still see a lot of battle scars, but now it's starting to look pretty cool. It's a shame that that one piece of, spruce has to show off. Other than that, even this one's not that bad. Other than that, it's in really fine shape in terms of color. All those broken spots have almost disappeared. I mean, they're there, but they've almost disappeared. I'm impressed. I'm going to put several more coats of the color on this to darken it up. I'll show you what that looks like just before I start putting the clear on. Well, there's what, about 5 or 6 coats of sprayed oil varnish and color looks like. And I really couldn't be much happier, at least compared to what we had before. I mean, it's not perfect, but doggone it, it looks now like a nice finish on a well cared for instrument, and you can barely see most of the breaks and cracks. That one replacement spot, like I said, it gets covered by the fingerboard, and even it doesn't look that bad. The difference is now it just doesn't have enough actual varnish on it, so I'm going to put more true oil varnish on it. Everybody does it with their finger. I've tried it several times. You know, I guess it's okay. I don't think putting it on with my finger seems to work very well for me. Maybe I'll get better at it, but it doesn't seem to do that great of a job with my finger, honestly. Some other people just swear by that's the way you got to do it, but it doesn't seem to go on that smooth or level or anything with me. It's easier, obviously, with your finger, and the cleanup is pretty easy. But it just doesn't seem to cover very well. And then I've actually left just as many runs with my finger as I've left any other way when I did it earlier. So, I don't know. My vote's out on this, but I'm going to try it one more time with my finger now that I've got it a nice even look to it. I want to get at least a couple of clear coats on it before I steel wool it, because I'm afraid I will take some of the color off unevenly. I really like the color now. Again, the color was just dark walnut minwax mixed in with this true oil varnish. And I mixed in, you know, a couple of full eyedroppers full to a very small container. So it was pretty dark looking, but it goes on light, a lot lighter than it looks. You'll have to experiment. And of course, each successive coat makes it a little darker. So you can control the color fairly well with that method. And not very many people have ever, at least that I've seen, have sprayed the oil varnish much. So to me, that's kind of a new technique, and it seemed to work great for me. I've sprayed all kinds of other varnishes, but not really oil varnish. That's kind of like, you know, people tell you do this, don't do that. Well, they've kind of always said, no, you don't spray oil varnish, you know. Well, maybe you should. That worked great, in my opinion. Better than anything I've done up to this point. Well, in my book, that's looking really fine. Yeah, that's starting to look like a fine old instrument. Doesn't even look like it was ever destroyed like it was. You know, seriously, folks, it was destroyed. I'm liking it a lot now. I really was having reservations before, but not now. I'm wiping it where I see thick spots. I don't want to leave it that way because I'm afraid it'll run. This stuff does run easy. That's one negative of this stuff, is it runs real easy. And you just have to keep putting it on and putting it on and putting it on until you get a buildup. It doesn't build up very fast. It doesn't even build up as fast as lacquer, if you ask me. But it's working. I like it. Well, I've got this little patch thinned down really thin for fixing the area where the sound post actually punched right through the top. You can kind of see the round hole there where it just broke through. And so this grain is going perpendicular to this grain, and I'll put it right there and glue it in place, and then I will also thin it down a little bit more so it'll be a very thin patch right there in that area.
But it still hurts inside, and I feel that I'm drowning in all the tears I've cried.
So we'll clean that up and then let that set for a couple hours, 3 or 4 hours, before we move on.
I am making like a river, swelling well outside its banks.
Well, that was very small already to start with, but I've carved it way thinner. In fact, I mean, you can certainly feel it, but it's, you know, definitely not very proud of the surface. So it's pretty thin. It's just there to kind of tie all that together, and I think it's going to do its job. So I'll do a little bit of sanding on that, or maybe scraping, probably sanding, and we'll call that good. That should make it very easy to put the sound post on that area. You know, it should be plenty strong. I don't think there'll be another issue with it. I think that's the only cleat that I'm going to put on the inside. I think that'll do. By most violin maker standards, there'd be a lot more cleats in this. I mean, there's a crack all the way through here, here, across here, up in here. There's lots of places that you could put cleats. But there's one place right here that's, to me, and I know the sides will hold a lot of this, but it's broken across here in 3 places. It's across here and back under here. So I think I'm going to put a small cleat that'll go around this, cover this area, and cover this area. I'll carve out the sound hole where it won't interfere with the sound hole. But I've got this grain, and this grain is going this way. It's very high-end grain, and it will be perfect for this purpose. And I'm just trying to match it up so that I'm making the best use of the wood. I think about right there is just about it. Well, no, I'm not happy with that either. I think I'm going to have to move it up to get it the way I want it. About there, I think, is just about perfect. So what I'm going to do is turn this over and draw this on here. Got the fine pencil point.
Longing like the water for a resting place.
Something along that line right there. So this inside area right here is probably where the patch is going to be. I wasn't completely happy with the first piece that I made, so I made a second piece, and I think I'm happier with it. And I'm going to go ahead and get it glued in place. Now it will interfere with the sides a little bit right here, but I think I can carve some of that away with the finger plane maybe once it's glued in place. I'm going to leave it thick right now, and then we'll thin this way down, and we'll also make sure it's not interfering with the sound hole at all. But I do think it's probably a good idea to put a cleat across this area right here, even though the sides will hold some of that. This is quite a stressful spot right there with the sound hole being here. If you bump this F hole right here, it could break this, and I just think this will help hold it a little bit better. Not great, but a little better. And I don't think it'll interfere with the sound any, especially by the time I carve it down real thin. So here we go. I'm going to get a number of clamps, actually probably at least 3 if not more on this little piece, believe it or not, because slight contour and I just want to kind of torque this little clamp into place. Even though it's fitting fairly flush, it'll just be better if I clamp it several places. That's what she looks like all glued up. This section here is just gluing a little tiny flab of spruce that was sticking up. It's no big deal at all. But this is definitely clamped well. None of these clamps are super tight. They're just snugged up good and snug. And I did get quite a bit of squeeze out all the way around there of the glue, so I know they're sticking down to the top well. And I'm just going to clean up most of the glue, whatever I can get in there for the moment. Most of it's going to get carved away anyway after this all sets up. I feel better though knowing that that area there is reinforced. I might put an additional tiny little patch right here because again it enters into this F-hole and you can press down on this and cause that to crack. Just a little tiny one. So this one is a very tiny little patch. Cleat, caul, patch, whatever you want to refer to it as. People get on me and always insist that I use the proper word. To me, it doesn't matter. This is not an English class. We're just fixing things. Got a nice large pad of leather under there, and I will just put some pressure on that cleat with this clamp. And I'm sure that will be more than sufficient. Again, I'll carve away almost all of that after the glue sets up. I've got plenty of faith in these cracks that are running down the length. I've got plenty of faith in the tight bond glue. I don't think we have to worry about that. Keep in mind that the center line in most instruments is glued and it's not cleated. I build mandolins and I don't cleat that center line joint, and they've been holding up for 30-40 years now and no problems whatsoever, so I'm not worried about these. These glued up well. I don't think there's an issue there. If I did, I would put cleats on them. So, you know, I trust the glue, and worst case scenario is if it fails down the road 50 years, someone can put cleats there. But I think we're in good shape. Well, my friends, there's what chocolate is looking like now. It's just nearly perfect, almost no sign of breakage. You go on the inside, you can see the little cleats that we've put in there, and if you look at them, they're very thin, filed down to almost nothing. This is very thin here. This probably looks like a cleat, but it's not. This is actual wood that was replaced, and that's that long thing that you can see on the top edge going all the way through the top there, because that was a hole and that wood was missing. So that's how we repaired it. We're ready to put the very final coat of the oil varnish on it, and here we go. Well, that looks really nice to me. I'm going to let that set overnight, and then hopefully tomorrow we should be ready to go. My friends, that glorious day is finally here. We are ready to put this violin back together. Old Chocolate is ready to be a violin again. And here's how we're going to do that. I've got all my clamps pre-sized to the thickness of the sides of this violin. Now these also double as guitar clamps and mandolin clamps and everything. I do have some that are much smaller that would be perhaps even better suited to the violin. Someone gave me these. First of all, they're just barely big enough for this particular violin, barely, and I'm not even sure they are big enough. And second of all, they don't have any padding in there, and I like the leather padding. I made all these clamps and I put leather rings on the inside, so that way when you're squeezing them down, you don't get an indentation. So I prefer these, even though these are a little bit clunky for a violin, they're not too bad. Second of all, I have my Titebond original that I'm going to glue it with. And just once again, if this is the only part of the video you're seeing, Titebond original can be taken apart just exactly like hide glue can be taken apart. It is a total myth that you cannot take Titebond apart. It comes apart with heat and water, moisture, just like hide glue does. The difference is it's not nearly as brittle. Hide glue turns to glass. It shrinks, it cracks, the joints break. That's why we repair so many instruments glued with hide glue. This will last, I bet, 100 years before anyone has to take it apart again. So here we go. I've been working with this new glue, what they call a glue bot, for a few days now, and up till this point it has not failed. Just now on camera, of course, it has decided to clog up. So that's the first time it's clogged on me. And let's just see how hard it is to get it apart or open. I'm just taking a toothpick and poking it through. Even as, you know, as frustrating as it is for this one to clog up, it's much easier to unclog, I believe, because of the tiny little spout here. The regular Titebond bottle clogs up, and it's a real pain to open back up. I've done it thousands of times, so I know how to do it. It's just much more difficult. Let's see if this is ready to work now. I think it is. This little glue bot is very handy. I got this at Menards, which is a local box store. It's much more precise for laying the glue out like this, so I do really like it. And it's even more compact, so you can take the bigger bottle of glue and use it as the refill bottle. Now I'm going to take a paintbrush and paint the glue up underneath here on the block. I use the brush also to spread the glue here and get it spread out. In case you have any doubts about being able to take Titebond apart, I do have a video out there where I took a guitar neck out of a guitar that I built for my brother, and it was glued on with Titebond, and I took it completely apart from a solid neck to completely removed in only 15 minutes, and that was Titebond. Try that with hide glue. I guarantee you, you won't be any faster. Okay, I believe that is it. I believe we're ready to go. It looks like a lot of glue. There's not that much glue on there. I like to keep the glue pretty thin so that it doesn't squeeze out on the inside. Just wiping around the inside edge with my finger to make sure there's nothing extra there. And now we're ready to add the new top back on here. It's not a new top, it's the original top. I should watch what I say and how I say it, because everybody will read something else into it. And it fits so perfectly that I didn't even have to remove this piece here that stayed glued to the block. I mean, it just fits back like a glove. You can see it snapped in around the neck. I mean, it almost virtually needs no clamps at all, other than just to keep it together, you know, to keep the sides and the top together here. Otherwise, it needs basically nothing. Now, I'm going to make sure that the neck angle stays up, so I'm going to probably wedge this a little bit to keep the height going on here. I'm going to put a couple of clamps just on the waist first. That way I can gauge how high this is. Put one there, and I'll put one over here. You notice I've already sized these clamps to the size of the violin to save time with the glue up like this. Okay, so now I want to measure down right here, because again, when you take an instrument apart, you're effectively resetting the neck. And so when you put it back together, you want to make sure the neck is at the proper height. So we want to measure that. And I want it to be about 7/8 of an inch, and presently we're actually under 3/4. Now, I would say that that's probably the way it's always been. It's probably been low, and if you have a little higher neck angle, then you can have a little higher bridge and get a little more volume and clarity out of your instrument. So I'm going to pull this back and make it go up and more or less force it into position. I'm going to put a piece of leather under here first, and then I'll just put wedges here until I get it where I want it. Actually, I'm going to turn the leather this way so I can measure down. And that way I can still measure down. Okay, now we're approaching the 7/8. Let's go just a little bit more. And there's just about 7/8 right there. Could go just a hair more even. And then as I tighten all this down, I'm hoping that the neck will stay there. It'll certainly probably stay above the 3/4, which it was below 3/4. And 3/4 is really borderline too low in my opinion. So anything below 3/4 is just too low in my opinion. In fact, 3/4 is a bit low, I think. Okay, so let's give it a shot. I'm going to get a little water to do a little cleanup on the squeeze out here as I go. So I'll take a quick break and do that, and I'll be right back. I've cleaned up most of the glue squeeze out off camera using a damp cloth and a paintbrush dipped in water. That way I can get into the tight areas. And we'll finish putting these clamps on, and we should be good to go then. Well, I don't believe that's going anywhere. I'm looking around just doing last detailing here with the paintbrush and the glue squeeze out, just trying to clean up any little things that I see. If I understand correctly, the little girl that owns this violin doesn't know that it's being restored. So, and I don't know if she's still a little girl or not. I don't know the whole story. Melissa will fill us in on the screen, I'm sure. But I would think that she's going to be real happy with the way this is turning out. So, nothing left to do now except to just let it set. And that's what we'll do. We'll let it set overnight. And then tomorrow we will buff this thing up a last little bit on the top, and then we will string it up. Well, my friends, I've taken the clamps off of the violin this morning, and unfortunately, even though they had leather on them, the leather kind of stuck and made marks in the finish. You know, partly that's my fault because of rushing through this. The finish hasn't had time to really cure properly. I was going to buff it out with the steel wool this morning anyway, so I'm going to see if that will remove these marks. If it doesn't, you know, I'll have to put another coat of finish on it. But I was going to do this anyway, so it's not that big a deal to at least rub it out with the steel wool and see if that fixes the problem. Worst case scenario is I'll have to put one more coat of varnish on this, and that wouldn't be a horrible thing if we have to do that. Just takes another day longer, or a couple days longer actually. Friends, I've just buffed out the top by hand. I used the semi-chrome polish first with a damp cloth, and then I put on the Renaissance wax. I didn't show that, but I'm going to go ahead and show a little bit of that process here on the back. You know, I'm going to try to buff this out a little bit. It's a little dull in places. I take a damp cloth like this. I like these blue shop towels, and I like the smooth blue shop towels, not the ones that have all the texture to them. And I'll just hand rub it with the semi-chrome polish. And I'll put on a couple little applications of that. Of course, you could do that longer and apply more, but I'm going to go ahead and buff that out, thinking I believe that that's probably enough for my purposes here. Yeah, that does a nice job of buffing it out. Now we will apply the Renaissance wax. I've got a little pad here that's just saturated with the wax, so I'll rub that in real good first. And then you want to immediately take the wax right back off. The main thing about wax is you keep your rag turning constantly if you really want to get it buffed off well. That's looking real good. I'll take another rag here, another dry rag, and buff it a little bit more. And you can see there the shine that it puts on there, a really nice shine. So with that in mind, we're ready to set this baby up. So I'll get started putting the parts back on it. I'm getting ready to put the strings on, and I have selected these strings. These are the ones I like. These are relatively expensive. These are medium tension, and the key to it is that they have the aluminum wound E. So it's not just a plain E string, steel E string. The aluminum winding gives it the sound more like the gut. These actually have a nylon core on all the other strings, but at least that E isn't just a single solid steel string. It's got the aluminum winding around it, which softens the tone of that E string significantly. Anyway, these are the closest thing to the gut sound at a reasonable price that I can find. So that's what I'm recommending, and that's what I'm putting on this violin. I think it deserves that. Even though these strings are a little more expensive, I think it's the way to go. Now, this tailpiece had also been busted across here, and I did glue it. However, I can see that I didn't clean it up yet, so I will clean it up right now. There's a little bit of glue squeeze out there that couldn't be cleaned up because of the clamps, but we will get rid of that at the moment. This has got that semi-chrome on it. Even though that's a piece of ebony, I'm going to buff it with that a little bit and then rub it really good. And that cleans it up pretty nice. You can still see it, but not bad. We'll start with the G string, since that's the first one to go on. I know this violin is played more in the classical style, so I am going to leave the tailpiece as is. I'm not going to put all 4 adjusters on there like I would typically do for the bluegrass and country players. I prefer to have all the adjusters on there. It just makes it so much easier to tune the violin. I know most of the classical players do not do that, so I'm not going to do that. The way I typically put the strings on is I go down through the hole, I leave a little bit of the tail stick out, I wrap back over that, I stay on that side of the string on the first wrap, and then after that I come back across and wrap back toward this side of the peg box. And that lines up the string with the slot here, and by wrapping over the top of the other strings, it locks it in. And now I'm going to see if I can get the tailpiece back on here. I think I can, but it's just going to be a real close fit. There it is. This bridge, in my opinion, has been cut backwards. They've got the writing on the front. I'm going to go ahead and set it up that way, but it's not the way I would typically do it. Since this is the bridge that was with the violin, I'm going to go ahead and set it up that way though. I can also tell that there's not going to be a lot of string clearance here. We might actually have to make a new bridge for it because I did raise this up as much as I could raise it up. It's presently between 3/4 and 7/8, which is about 13/16 of an inch presently, which is just about perfect. That's the way they ought to be. That gets more pressure down on the top. So I'll get the strings on this, very light pressure, just to hold this in place, and then we'll measure it for a sound post. Well, I've got the strings on it. I also put the chin rest on it. I put some felt under here. It already had cork pads on the upper side, so that's fine. The bridge that is on here, I told you, in my opinion, was cut incorrectly. And in addition to that, it's just going to be too low with the new setup, which is really a good thing. It's always good to be able to put a little taller bridge on an instrument rather than the shorter that it had. But I am going to go ahead and make a new bridge for this, so we'll do that now. Well, I'm fitting the bridge to the top. I've got a piece of 220 sandpaper there. I like to have a little bit of tension on these strings holding the bridge down. That helps the sanding go much faster. Now, I've gotten comments in the past that why don't I go forwards and backwards with my bridges like most luthiers do. And the problem with doing that, in my opinion, is that it always rocks. The bridge will rock back and forth, and then you get both edges are rocked off of the thing, and I want the edges flat so that it sits on the top flat. By going sideways just a tiny amount, and I'm not moving it very far, I'm seriously only moving it about 1/8 inch in each direction, if that, and probably not that much. And it just takes it off really fast, especially with the string tension on there. And in just a few seconds, the bridge will fit the top perfectly. There won't be a bit of space, and the bottom will be perfectly flat. That's why I do it this way. So now I'm going to mark the height of the bridge, and the way I do it is I just take a standard number 2 type pencil and I use it to mark the approximate height. Works really well, and you can see there I've marked it. And on this side, I generally have a longer, flatter curve than on this side. And you can control that by the way you mark it here. Anyway, that gives you a really good starting point. And generally when I cut that off, I just barely leave the mark.
I am aching like a river, swelling well outside its banks. I am longing like a...
Typically, I measure 325 millimeters from the inside edge of the nut here to the inside edge of like the E string. But this one, if I set it there, it's going to be that way quite a bit further forward, which is not terrible, but I just wouldn't like it. So I actually have it set at 5 millimeters back, and that puts it pretty close to the center of the F-holes. So this is actually at 330 millimeters. I like to use 325 as my standard. It seems to fit most violins, but it doesn't fit all violins. And you just have to go with what you have. So I'm just setting it at 330. I think that's going to be fine. Now we're about ready to fit it for the sound post. I have my sound post tool here, and the way this works is you manipulate this inside the violin till you get it where you believe the sound post should be. And in this case, it should be about where it punched through the top of the violin. And that looks to be just about right at that point there. And well, now it's moved on me, so go. I think that's just about right. So we'll tighten it down in that spot. And it will be interesting to see, this was the original sound post, to see how close it is to the same height. It looks pretty good. We could possibly use it, but this seems to be just a hair long You know what that is? That's probably the pad that I put in there. Had I not had to put the pad in there to support the area where the sound pushed through the hole, it probably would have went right back in the exact right spot. But I will have to take just a tiny bit off of this, and when I say a tiny bit, I'm really talking like a millimeter. That's about what I have to take off. I've cut a little bit off the sound post, and I'm going to try to fit it in here now. You know, I thought the sound post looked a little large, and it doesn't fit through the F-hole. It does on the bass side, but not on the treble side. Well, it does. It just barely does. Boy, it just barely fits. There you go. Well, at least it fits. I was wondering how they got that in there because I couldn't get it to go through the hole. You know, I think this sound post is just a little bit clunky. It's a little bit too big around, especially the way that I have to get it through there. So I think I'm going to chuck this up in the drill and sand just a little bit of this off to make it just a little bit smaller, and I think that'll be a good thing. You can probably tell how easy this goes through the hole that I did take off quite a bit on the diameter there. And that's a good thing in my opinion, because you don't want them to be heavy and bulky and clunky. Sometimes these sound posts go in really simple and really no problem at all, and other times not so much. So far this one is not so much. You know, I'm pulling on the top of the sound post, and would you not know that the bottom foot of the sound post moved instead of the top. It's kind of par for the course sometimes. It's amazing how stuff like that can do things like that. I'm pulling seriously on the top and the bottom moved. The top seems to be stuck in place. It just will not move. Okay, what's up with that? It must be stuck on the pad that I made somehow. So I'm going to reach in there, take it out, and start again. And to reach in there, I can take it out with this tool, or maybe even move it with this tool. I'll try moving it first. Well, it did move, but it moved way further than I was trying. Maybe I'll get it in the right spot yet. No, I'm not happy with that spot either, so we're going to try again. I think I can live with that. It's a little behind the foot, and yet it's in pretty good shape. Trying to get the strings to appear to be even here on the top, and I've got them pretty close. Starting to put a little tension on them now. You know, when a violin is set up well, it seriously is ready to fall apart, because every single part is friction. There's nothing, you know, mechanically fastened into place. And I'm going to remeasure in millimeters again on where I'm located there. A little far forward again. Now I want to go back to that 330 millimeters. And actually the way I'm doing that with a tape measure is I'm starting at the 1, which takes off 10 right away. So you have to subtract 10 from the number here that you're using back here. So I've got it at 340, which would be 330. So that's perfect. It looks real good. We'll now start the tuning process. And once again, for those of you who are fans of the brown recluse, we have one right here, a live specimen that is crawling around inside the pick box here. Let me see if I can get him out for you. I don't mind killing them with my hand, but I don't really like picking them up while they're alive exactly. It doesn't really scare me too much. There he is right there. And if you think I'm kidding that that's a brown recluse, look up close there. You'll see the fiddle on his back if you look really close. And now I'm going to put an end to his drab life. So he is no longer, and I did it on camera, yet you can't really see, but you can kind of imagine. We don't like brown recluses, but we have our share of them. They are thick here, actually. Well, my friends, you are in for a real treat. My friend Allie is here, and she is a concert violinist. Instead of one of my typical bluegrass scratching that you usually hear, we're going to get to hear somebody that really knows how to play one of these things. And she's going to do a piece from Vivaldi. Why don't you tell them what it is you're going to do?
It's the second violin part of the Vivaldi Concerto in A minor for 2 violins.
Easy for her to say. So I'm going to just turn it over to Allie and let her play a piece for you here on this chocolate violin. Wow, that worked for me. She's even dressed in her concert black. I mean, my goodness, she got all dressed up for the occasion, the whole bit. She does it first class. That's wonderful, Allie. I really appreciate that. Have you got another piece you'd like to play for us?
Sure.
Why not? She's here. It's a long way here, too. You can't get here from just any place.
Especially when you get lost on the way.
She had a little misturn, on the way here, but, eventually all roads lead here. So let's see. What are you going to try next?
Do you want me to stay in classical?
We can stay in classical if you want, or we can go to somewhere else. It doesn't matter to me.
I'll play my favorite song.
All right, she's going to play her favorite song. We'll find out what that is.
You might not know it. I learned it in Guatemala.
She learned it in Guatemala? I probably know it then by heart. Wow, that's beautiful. I'll tell you what, when Chocolate got here, and by the way, Allie doesn't know that's the name of this violin.
I like it even more now.
This violin's name is Chocolate, as you all know. And when Chocolate got here, it was probably the most bitter chocolate I ever saw. And she just made it sound like the sweetest chocolate I ever heard. I mean, that was just wonderful.
Thank you.
That was beautiful. Very, very, very nice. I hope you all enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching.